Hello and welcome to the next episode of Speak, where we will be speaking about the zero harm fallacy. And the critical question for me, and the thing that I want to dig into because it irritates me, is it real? What are your thoughts, Elisa?
Is zero harm real?
Yeah.
Fuck no, that's real. I'm sorry, did I?
No, we can hang up now. Thank you very much. We've sorted it out. Anyone listening that has a zero harm strategy, you know what to do with it.
It's done. I just put my colours on the mast there straight away. Should have gave more of a lead up, shouldn't I? Build up the suspense. What's she thinking?
You know, but I agree though, and I think for me it feels that blunt and that cut and dry. I don't know how and I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone that has this as a thing. I think if you have something to aim for and it's generating good positive action, yay you, great. But actually the target of zero harm, it's impossible. And to anyone listening that think that's a cliff edge, we've just dived straight into the middle of it, it's because it feels that logical that it's not real. And the one example that I gave, and I think Peter Jenkins, the awesome Peter Jenkins, played this back to me. I said on one of our Project Millennium calls, what are you going to remove? Weather or people? But if zero harm is the real thing and no one's ever going to get hurt ever, of those two things, what are you doing with either of those? Because both of them create environments or actions or circumstances that lead to harm. I don't know I don't know a scenario where you could say an engineer walking through a field in the pouring rain with 10 tons of kit with long grass and unable to see what's under their feet is never going to trip, never going to twist an ankle. Thoughts.
I think to achieve zero, shut your doors and stop, close your business down.
Yeah.
And I don't even think a lot of business leaders would have a problem with me saying that, to be honest. It does feel like it's more that safety professionals have a problem with it, because most non-safety people are like, oh, yeah, no shit. Things happen, things go wrong. Yes, there are preventable accidents and incidents, but there are also ones that are maybe not so preventable. And it's not crazy to say that. And we're not bad safety people for saying that we don't believe that zero harm is achievable. And often you would almost be made to feel like you're anti-safety for saying that. So I've had a conversation with someone before where I'm like, no, I don't believe in zero harm. I don't agree with the approach. You're anti-safe, so you're okay with harm, are you? That is absolutely fucking not what I said.
Yeah. And it's funny, the question I wrote down here, and I often get in response to it's not real, is, are you saying that harm is acceptable? Yeah. And therefore, what is your job? And I think you have to reverse it and not come at it with such a black and white view. It's not that it's acceptable or not acceptable, it's the fact it's inevitable. And that's the thing that has to be acknowledged. It isn't that you're anti-safety, it isn't that you're saying, I only want to do part of the job. We wouldn't be doing what we do for a living if we were not completely committed to getting people home. And it has to be the goal that everybody gets home. But in that, you can't be naive and have zero plan for when somebody really does get hurt. It's that, oh, you must not care. That's not true. In fact, I care so much. I'm being totally rational and thinking about what is completely foreseeable. And
it's interesting when it comes to the zero harm argument and the language around it. And I would definitely be on the thing of anti-zero harm, whatever. But I remember being in a conversation with someone before that was of the same view as me, and they were like, zero harm is ridiculous, and the company I'm working at the moment, like they're just pushing 0, 0, 0, and I don't know what to do and how do I approach this with them because I don't agree with it. And so I was like, okay, like let's talk through it. But then they said, yeah, like they're just all like 0 fatalities. And I was like, well, rewind, 0 fatalities. I'm fucking 100% behind.
Thank you.
Like,
yes.
Like, let's be very clear. 0 fatalities. Yes, please. 0 life-changing injuries. Yes, please.
Yep.
Like 0.
Yeah.
None of those. But like 0 absolute harm. Like let's define what is harm. Yeah. And then put 0 against that. So like paper cuts, don't give a shit, mate. Don't care. Don't waste my time. Yeah. You know, bit of a rolled ankle, not ideal, but I'm not going to be like, stop everything, fucking stand everybody down with a rolled ankle. So I think it's understanding what is harm, and then it's understanding the degrees of how we respond to that harm.
Yeah.
And how we attempt to prevent it. Yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned something that I'm really passionate about, and I think the intolerance for me is 100% the fatalities and life-changing injury. And it's interesting the amount of people that you have a conversation with and you say, well, what are you measuring? And it's usually the typical LTIs or the riddles. Well, let's not forget that you can twinge your back, go home, be at home for several days, your riddle, and you're going to come back to work. And that's absolutely not underplaying health impact of work. Very passionate about it. But I'm then talking about, is that the same as somebody that has had a truly life-changing injury? And for me, life-changing is any impact on income, ability to do their previous profession, any ability to go about the daily life, and they have to do that in a different way. I total intolerance, 0, like you say, exactly 0 of those. 0 fatality.
One of those, thanks.
Yeah. No. But I think that was one of my sort of questions around this was when this was created, when this was, the strap line of 0 harm was created, do you think that we were coming from a place where we were looking at severe harm, and what we actually meant was we don't want to kill anybody, we don't want anybody to lose a limb? Or do you think someone came up with that and one day was like, oh no, blue sky thinking, I don't want paper cuts anymore. I don't really want anybody to sprain an ankle anymore. Or, I mean, I can't get my head around that actually being somebody's logic to start something off. And it's taken like wildfire because I think it demonstrates an intolerance to harm. Yes. And I'm down for intolerance to really big things happening and lives changing for the sake of work. But like you say, the small level accidents, was that what it was meant to be?
See, this could take us down a whole other track of, were any of the things meant to be the way they are now? Like, we talk about PBS or any of those things, behavioral-based safety, like bastardized and just flogged to death in the worst way. Yeah. It started out as something that could have been really good. And so 0 harm, look, I actually should have prepped. I don't know where 0 harm came from or who came up with it first or where it appeared from. But it has always, to me, felt like a corporate type of slogan-y campaign type thing anyway. Yeah. So, yeah, was it born out of a marketing team somewhere? Like some safety guys went, oh, we should ask marketing. And then they came up with this.
Yeah, 0 harm. Something in me is like, I feel like in the last, in the time that I've been doing safety, 19 years, there's definitely been a change from just compliance, tick the box, say the thing, do it, to we're sort of waking up to what is realistically safety and what is within our gift. And we're having much more competent, deep diving conversations at senior level about what is really achievable, what can really do and what we're all here for. And I feel like maybe back then saying something like 0 harm was totally acceptable because we were just like, yes, people, yeah, 0 harm. At the time it was created, and I did try and look at the origin of this, and it's just like it comes from a million different places. But at the time we were budgeting deaths. Let's try only to kill 4 people this year. Because let's not forget, we come from a time where everyone was like, oh, killed 6 people last year. Let's try and do 4. Continuing improvement. Ugh. Let's try and do 4 and then 3 and then 2. And actually, at some point, and I was told an old wives' tale back in the day when I was on an EBOSH course, and I'd love to know if it was true, that it was BT who actually put a line in the sand and said, I'm not budgeting. This is wrong. It's not acceptable to say that X amount of people are going to die this year. No one dies. And whether at that point, because they were coming from such a low base, actually they were talking about much bigger things when they thought about harm, because at some point death was acceptable. So maybe it comes from there. And actually we've just sort of woken up and gone, well, actually we look at all these different types of harm now. We look at every type of granular risk and every type of granular accident. Maybe we don't need to be so sort of charge at all of the smaller level injuries. Maybe we can just give them a light level overview. Were the current controls in place? Is there anything we can learn from there? No. Move on. Yes. Let's make sure the controls work. It's not always been the conversation about proportionate investigation and proportionate action from the level of injury or the level of incident. It was always just like, you do all the things no matter what.
All the things. Jesus Christ. Do all of the things.
Do all the things. Take a picture of the scene. Paper cut. Paper.
Or like a bit of rubble. It's like, picture somebody rolled their ankle here. It's like, or like literally had where, you know, it's a photo of a tarmacked car park, fucking pristine, and someone's just scuffed their fucking toe or something, I don't know, just and shuffled over themselves, rolled their ankle, and it's like, investigation. Like, oh, I hate us for this. Can we not? Out there taking the photo going, hate myself. Like, oh.
Thank you. I think anything where someone's going, I don't really know what to put, it means you've asked the wrong question.
Yeah. And do you need to be asking a question?
I mean, oh God, I mean, this could take us down into a whole episode about actual accident investigation and how we do and
don't.
Oh,
we'll definitely.
That's okay. We'll add it to the pad, accident investigation. Guys, listeners, you must join us, because there will be rants and there will be enlightening moments. I am so sure.
There will be learning.
There will be learning. But yeah, I just think I did some Googling today on zero harm, just to see how many companies came up next to it with the slogan or a separate webpage or something dedicated to it. And I actually, because I have never bought into zero harm, I've never thought it was logical. I was actually really surprised today at just how many big blue chip, FTSE organization institutes, all basically with a strategy around this. And I think if you are listening to this and you are feeling a bit triggered and a bit annoyed because you've written that policy and you've written that program, this is a learning environment. And the only thing that we would ask of you is to reflect on what you really mean by zero. And actually, the one thing you can do to an organization, actually into a workforce, I think, is give them a target that's never achievable. And I think this falls in line with, well, I'd love to know your thoughts on those boards. That's like zero, it's 1,000 days and since the last lost time injury. Like, what's your thought on celebrating days without a lost time injury?
I think it's really bizarre behavior. Let's celebrate that nothing has happened. But also, and I know this point has been made by many people who talk around zero harm, and I suppose the argument against zero harm, and definitely one of them would be Clive Lloyd, who talks about it. But it's this thing of, if you're walking in that gate every day and you see the number is like 344 days or whatever it is since the last injury, and next thing you put your back out or something happens, you're not going to be the one to ruin the record. Yeah. So you're not going to report it. So then the zero isn't real. Yeah. That's where the fallacy is, because if people don't feel safe enough to report it, or they don't want to be the dickhead that ruins Pizza Friday because, or whatever other shite waste of time, by the way, culture building thing you've got on, they're not good. It's just not going to work. Then that's where the fallacy is. None of it's real then. And that does, like, 100% underreporting happens when there's such a focus on numbers and when it's shoved in your face the minute you walk in the gate.
Yeah. I think I've been to a number of companies where even on the outside of their reception, they've got like their fatality, the frequency rates and all of that stuff, and day since and absence and all on the outside of the building, super proud. And transparent. And transparent, right? And transparent. And I think you've nailed it, because all I thought when I walked up to there was, I bet somebody walking in is like, that best not be me. Please don't let that be me. And I think if you are a leader that is detached from the reality of work, typically senior, not working frontline, don't know how it feels on your body, don't know what the stress feels like, it's really easy to be like, well, yeah, good. Want to be the person that doesn't break that, so you do better things.
Yeah.
But actually, it doesn't encourage somebody to behave differently. It makes you A, worry that it would be you, and B, you've alluded to it already, that lack then of freedom to say, oh, I've just hurt myself. It wasn't a big thing, or it was a big thing. We'll just stash that away because I know Pizza Friday relies on there being no incidents. I know, we celebrate this in a particular way, and I'm going to support it. I'm going to make that 0.
And I know that XYZ's bonuses are linked to this target.
I've seen that before.
Vile. Like, that's some sick shit.
Yeah. Well, I think
I've been in meetings that were called like the traffic light meeting for your fucking green, yellow, red, whatever, charts of stats, and a regional operations manager sitting there going, well, these fucking stats better go down. This better get lower, and it better get lower by X date. And everyone's sitting there going, because we know that's when the bonuses are sorted out. Like, this is rotten to the core.
Yeah. And I don't think, I think somebody that is, again, sort of separate from that reality of frontline work and what it really takes and what risk looks like, and how often you have a squeaky bum moment, as we would call it in my house, right? Like, oh, that nearly happened.
That phrase.
I've lost my train of thought though with that phrase.
You're like the third person I've heard say that phrase this week, and I'm like, why did he say this? So
so yeah, I don't think the target and the association of bonus with that 0 comes from a bad place. I think it is from a slightly beautifully ignorant place. It's lovely that you don't understand it that much. Well, it's not lovely, but it is the fact, because what you're trying to do is incentivize great behavior, and you're trying to incentivize a change. You're trying to incentivize somebody making a different decision, but actually it doesn't do that. It makes everybody worry. It makes them clam up. And actually, there are different things to celebrate. I think going into a meeting about safety and having somebody that never speaks up say, I don't think something's going right. Actually, I think we've got a piece of equipment that's poor. We've changed a process and it doesn't work. Like, let's celebrate everybody feeling totally cool with calling you out, calling change out, saying something doesn't work. And it doesn't have to be measurable, actually, what you celebrate. It can just be that felt different. And I'm just going to call that out, rather than, like you say, sitting in meeting. Now, I've never sat in a meeting where somebody quite clearly is saying, by February 20th, we need this sorted out, because February 20th is payday, bonus payday. But I can imagine that drives all sorts of even worse behaviors of like cooking numbers and what's really important.
Yeah. And like I've spoken about it before, where I've had an injury at the very start of a project where it ended up being an LTI, so they were off for however long, but because of how the formulas work, and this isn't even getting into how statistical data isn't valid the way that we do it, or within the numbers or whatever, the volumes, I guess, but this incident happened within the first 3 weeks of the site opening. It was a construction site, we're in the groundworks phase, and I didn't have the man hours built up to absorb it. So like when you see like the graph, it just went phew off the fucking page. It was like, oh, that graph that's never coming back down. Because if that injury had happened 6 months into the project, I would have had more man hours to absorb it. So it wouldn't have looked as bad. Like this is like, that's fucked up.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's so interesting. When you said about that's never coming back down, it brought me back to a conversation with a previous employer. They had scorecards, and one of the measures was safety. And there was, again, this like zero attitude, not allowed. It was a fail. And we had something happen at the beginning of the financial year, and everybody just stopped caring because it was lost, because there was no way of getting it back. You couldn't do anything. The incentive, because it was a binary zero, the incentive was gone. Nobody tried. Nobody engaged in the meetings. It lost everybody. And I remember being at like an all hands event, like and I said to a couple of really key open, like, we'll tell you the outwardly honest truth. How do you feel once that's gone red? And what's your feeling on trying to still tackle safety? And they said, it's lost. There's no point. We lost the incentive and everything else the second that the year started. So why would you bother touching it? So actually, we've got all these other million metrics that we have to meet that I can influence. Why would I bother there?
Yeah.
So you have put your success on zero. Because zero is lost and you can't come back from zero, you then turn everybody off from doing the extra, doing the effort, doing the improvement, doing the better conversations. You turn everyone off. Mm. And I played that back with we really need to look at this. And actually it triggered a very good conversation around this life-changing injury and fatalities, and saying actually what we should be measuring. And my boss at the time was a NED in the NHS and a non-executive director in the NHS. And he was saying in the NHS, they call them never events. And he said in the NHS, it would be leaving a bit of kit in somebody after an operation, just stuff that should never, ever happen, that we should define these things as never events. The rest is continual improvement. The rest is just continual work and learning. The things we wouldn't tolerate are never events, or life-changing injury and fatality.
I like that. I like never events.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. It was really, really nice. And they went with that. So it was a beautiful piece of learning, but it took a bit of storytelling. And I know we're going to do an episode on storytelling. It took a bit of, I genuinely had a conversation, and this is how somebody feels. This is their journey. Binary, dead in the water, 1 month in, leave it for dead.
It's interesting that the response is, sure, look, right, it's no point flogging a dead horse now, it's done. And I had somebody else say to me before about their response to when their stats got blown, and it was relief, which I found really interesting.
Isn't that
so amazing? Yeah, because I was like, oh, it's done now. Like, and actually I think now I suppose it's a separate, well, is it separate to this topic? Maybe not, but they had been telling me how, and I had experienced similar, how we'll say an injury happens and next thing you start managing, like you're no longer like managing an incident, you're like managing to make sure that it doesn't evolve into whatever type of stat. So it's either, okay, this could be an LTI, but we want 0 LTIs. So it's like, okay, can we get this down to a medically treated injury? Or, hey, if we use glue instead of stitches, it's actually classified as a first aid and not a medically treated, and all this kind of jazz. But this person was telling me how they put so much time and effort into managing these cases. And it was down to their relationships with the medical staff in the nearby medical clinic. That's why they were getting doctor's certificates to say, oh yeah, they're okay for light duties, therefore it's not an LTI. And this person was like, without me doing that, like schmoozing and moving and shaking and probably, you know, having the chats with the ladies on reception or whatever it needed to be, this stat would not exist. Like, so, but they were on holidays and an incident happened and there was nobody there to do the schmoozing and the chasing up with the doctor and get the right cert, get the desired result. I actually remember being sent off site with an injured person before, going, take them down to the medical center and just make sure, you get the desired result, which is, do not fucking come back here with a certificate that says they don't have work capacity on it. But so this other person was like saying how this injury happened while they were away, and they were like, oh, thank God, like it's done. The stand is blown. They'll see that this takes a lot more than just, like, it's not easy, this whole keeping it at 0 or keeping it a non-LTI or getting light duties. Like, there's a lot of, it's a black art.
Yeah. And if you've got to, I think the really interesting thing, especially for anybody listening that's on this journey, or maybe got to the point of at least questioning, it's if you really have got to, or are thinking in the future of having a board with 0 on it, to get to that takes a lot of things that you don't want.
There's no it's the integrity. And like, I've done it. I've had the chats with the doctors. I've had medical certs changed. Like, it's not proud of it, but that's what had to be done to get the desired result. Like, and you have companies they've got company doctors, they've got physios. I've worked for companies who've had paramedics on site in the first aid office 24 hours a day. Like, whenever there's construction staff on site, there's a paramedic there. So then they don't go off site for treatment.
So therefore doesn't trigger.
And it's like, oh my God, but the injury is the same. You're just reclassifying it. And the impact on the person is the same. Like, you don't give a shit about the person.
Yeah, that's the bit that's lost in it, because it doesn't matter if you manipulate the figure is real, the figure is not real, whatever it is, you've engineered something or not. The actual reality of what happened on that day in that event to that person happened anyway. And the only thing that should really matter to anybody managing that is, are they okay? What did happen? And the absolute duty in my eyes, to understand what went wrong that led to it, to ensure that we learn everything we can from it, if there is anything to learn, because I know this is also a really dirty thing, but sometimes accidents happen. That's reality. Sometimes Beverly will just trip over her own shoes. Sometimes you will wear heel. I've done it. I've worn heels being like totally applicable, for, like, fine for work, and they've been too high, and I've gone base over apex, and I've done a bit because the shoes I'm wearing is not right, and it's a slippy, marbly floor.
I was rushing around so fast one day, I literally hit myself in the face with the door. I was fucking walking around with like this mark on my face for 3 days after. One of the girls in the office was like, what happened to your face? I was like, nothing, like full on, like running out of the office. Boof.
There's nothing to learn from that. And I do remember it was about 12 years ago on an accident course. It had been run by this really old guy. And he said, if you ever get to the point of an accident and you're saying either, be more careful because I don't know what to write, right? Be more careful. Or was it or I don't know, then you just haven't digged in far enough. And I'm like, but what about, he said, well, give me a scenario. And I gave one. I'd seen an accident where this guy was doing a T round. He was walking with his tray that he carries every single day. And he was, absent-minded, thinking of something. And he just tripped up the step and he spilled the coffee and he burnt his leg. And I don't know what. And he was like, well, why was he rushing? Why did he use the tray? Why wasn't there a trolley? And I was like, he's used the tray 50,000 times. He just wasn't thinking that, well, why wasn't he thinking? Maybe he needed the loo. Maybe it's just, we need to be more comfortable with that so that we can really focus on the never events. So I think really interestingly, if we were going to start pulling some of these points together for the listeners, some of the things that have jumped out at me have been, if you really are going to get to 0, there's stuff in there that you don't want because it's not real. I would say to anyone writing a zero harm policy who has a zero harm policy, ask maybe a couple of questions, and I don't know how you feel about these or whether you would have any builds. One of them is it realistic for what you do? For the environment that you work in, for the equipment, for the people, for the dynamic tasks, is 0 realistic? Second question, is 0 harm what you really mean? Or do you mean 0 never events? Because all there for that. And then, yeah, I think, and then also the boards that celebrate the 0 harm and all that sort of stuff. There's something that I have definitely seen time and time again, it sounds like you have as well, where please understand that those boards and what you celebrate in relation to those boards creates fear, quietness, and probably several layers of I just won't tell, I just won't say it out loud. So not particularly healthy. So there's something here about really think about what you celebrate and how you incentivize. And is there a scenario where somebody telling you the truth could cost somebody something, so therefore it might not happen?
Yeah, and I would add, and to that end, understand the power dynamics within your organization, within the reporting structures, within those bonuses. And the other thing I would also say is, when you're defining harm, we are not just talking about the physical realm. And this is linking back to the previous episode of psychological health and safety. What are the psychosocial hazards in your workplace, and can you eliminate them? So it needs to be an overall holistic view and nuance and context for everything.
Yes, definitely. No, I love those builds. Lovely. I think really good place to leave actually for the guys listening as well. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. I hope this has given you something to reflect on. Remember, this podcast is open. We are not editing it. We never will. We want it to be really open to show that we are human. It's very honest. It's a learning environment. So we will chat through things that we want to discover and learn more about, but also we hope that you do too. So honest, open learning and unedited. So please join us next time, where we will speak about endless content consumption and whether it is really necessary for success. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.